Part 1. The Door Beneath Lumbridge. Settle in, traveller. Let the room grow dim and kind. Pull the blanket to your chin and listen to an old voice that has seen many dawns and prefers the soft parts of night. We'll begin where many human stories do, in Lumbridge, where bread cools on wide sills, the river keeps easy company with a mill, and a castle sits like a lamp on a hillside, steady as a heartbeat. It was on a quiet evening, when the castle's stones were giving off the last of the day's warmth, that a little tremor sighed through the cellars. Barrels tapped against one another like old friends in a crowded tavern. A shelf muttered, a flagon clinked, and then, crrr, something in the wall let go. The servants fetched mops, and the steward fetched words, and at last the Duke, Horatio, whose manners could set a room at ease the way a candle softens a corner, came down to see for himself. In the lantern light, what they found was not a grand archway, not a carved portal with runes and warnings, but a neat gape in the masonry, a gap just large enough to give the imagination ideas. Sigmund, the Duke's advisor, twitched at the dust on his sleeves and muttered about monsters and menace. He was forever tripping over his own fear on the way to a conclusion. The Duke stood very still and listened, the way one does when a house makes a new sound. "There's a world in there," he said at last. "We should find out whose." So a small party formed. Quiet shoes, steady hands, and into the opening they went. The air just beyond the cellar had a dampness to it, the good sort that makes your cheeks wake up. They carried proper light, a sensible lantern, the sort that doesn't go sulky in a draught, and followed rough-cut stone that soon turned to honest earth. The castle's orderly belly gave way to the first ribs of the Lumbridge swamp caves, where dark has opinions and light is a guest with good manners. The path felt older than Lumbridge, but kinder than legend. It asked only that you move gently and keep your flame fed. Not far along, someone's boot heel scuffed a small thing half sunk in the silt. A brooch, no larger than a thumb, glinted like a patient eye. Its etchings were not the loud scratches of warlike goblins you hear about in alehouse stories. No, these lines were tidy and sure, laid by a hand that took its time. They carried the trinket up to the light, and into the care of people who know old things, to Reldo in Varrock, the librarian whose spectacles always seem on the verge of slipping into a story of their own. He turned the brooch and breathed a word like a secret, careful not to startle it. Dorgashun, a lost tribe said to be cave-dwellers. Goblins, yes, but of a sort quiet in their customs and earnest in their craft. Back beneath the castle, the path grew sure of itself and widened into a guarded way. There waited a cave goblin with a watchman's posture and very steady eyes. He was called Mistag by those who knew him, and he carried his authority like a good cloak, not to be flaunted, but to keep the chill off everyone nearby. He did not leap to conclusions about the lantern-bearing humans. He let the light speak first. When words came, they were measured and simple, like stones across a stream. There was some listening, some looking, and, eventually, a nod. These weren't raiders blundering into the dark. These were neighbours who had knocked on an unexpected door and then had the grace to wait on the threshold. In time, Mistag would return to his deeper duties, and a younger guide would take his place along the tunnel. Khazgar, a lean, eager fellow whose steps remembered every turn. He was the helpful sort you trust, without quite knowing why. The sort who knows which rung on the ladder creaks and warns you before you put your weight on it. "Stay close," he'd say, and the lantern's circle would bob ahead, a pocket of day sewn into night. He would lead travellers to the Dorgashun mines and back again, across paths that twisted like threads in a weaver's work. Down there, in the muffled country beneath Lumbridge, lived a people who had made calm their craft. The Dorgashun were goblins by kindred, yes, broad ears and round eyes and hands that loved tools, but the old surface stories about goblin brawls and squabbles hung loose on them. In their workshops the air smelled of warmed metal and lamp oil. In their market halls hushed voices traded not only goods but ideas. A hammer strike, a soft laugh, the click of a crossbow lever in a classroom. These were the notes of a city that had decided eons ago that shouting wastes breath better spent on making. Their capital was called Dorgash Khan, and if you've never seen it, imagine constellations strung on wires and footbridges that curve as though listening. Imagine a hush busy with purpose. Imagine a place that grew great not by conquest, but by refusing to be interrupted. Of course, the surface has ears of its own, ears that don't always listen kindly. Around Lumbridge there was a clutch of humans who called themselves HAM, Humans Against Monsters, full of slogans, tight collars, and the old, trembling certainty that anything not human must be an enemy rehearsing. They kept to their halls and whispered to one another until their whispers believed themselves wise. They sent letters to nobles and planted anxieties like weeds along the hedges of power. The name of Dorgash Khan, when it reached them, tasted like a problem in their mouths. Yet fate, which likes to tie knots where it pleases, had a different thread for the two worlds. The Dorgashun elders, who measured decisions as carefully as craftsmen measure timber, chose an emissary to visit the surface, someone bright enough to see a new sky and brave enough to walk beneath it. Her name was Zanik. She was young, but the way flint is young, capable of flame if you knock it the right way. She wore a crossbow fitted for cave hands, and on her brow lay a thin, pale mark, set there by a meeting with the ancient tears beneath the earth. Some say a destiny chose her in that blue-lit cavern, as the eyes of Guthix see all balances and occasionally set a finger on the scale. Whatever the case, the mark shone faintly when the light caught it, like a memory remembering itself. On the day Zanik first climbed the last rungs of the cellar ladder, the castle kitchen was baking, and the church bell had the soft patience of an old friend. She squinted at the light and laughed, a quick surprised sound as if the sky had told a joke only she could hear. The world above was so wide it felt like standing inside a bell, and every sound rang to the horizon. A sparrow darted past her ear and became, for a heartbeat, the most important creature in Gielenor. "Bread," she said, sniffing the air, and followed her nose to the cook, who waved away her coins and pressed a warm heel into her hands. She broke it slowly, as though releasing a small, captive son. They made a simple tour that first day. No grand speeches, no treaties scratched with quills. Zanik greeted Hans in the courtyard, who has greeted everyone since time learned to idle. She peered through the slats of the mill to watch flour turn from effort to soft weather. She traced the patterns of the chapel's stained glass with a finger, marvelling at how humans teach their light to wear colour. And through it all, the Duke kept his welcome easy, and Sigmund kept his suspicions busy. There is a kind of heroism that wears armour, and another that wears listening. Zanik's earliest bravery was the second kind. She asked the names of things and waited for them to answer. She did not stride. She wandered. She learned the schedule of rain on the castle roof, how it ticks before it sings. She learned that farmers have more sky than most folk, and that children's questions arrive in threes. When she slept that first surface night, beneath a quilt and a window that refused to shut up about the stars, she dreamed not of battles, but of bridges. But bridges are exactly what some fear. In a half-hidden hall not far from the willow-lined banks, the HAM faithful were tying their ideas into knots, pulling until their own thoughts squeaked. "Goblins in our cellars," they said, rubbing their arms where gooseflesh had risen at the thought of change. "Goblins in our city," they grumbled, "and next they'll want our chairs, our bread, our air." Their leader had a voice that carried in close rooms and faltered in open fields, and he flattered every anxious heart as if anxiety were a virtue. When word of Zanek's excursion reached them, it sounded to their ears like a drumbeat before invasion. They called it a sign. The rest of us called it a visit. Meanwhile, below, Dorgesh Khan continued its reliable hum. Lamps were checked, lessons recited. In the mines, the tap-tap of picks set a tempo that soothed more than it strained. Khazgar walked his routes, the little slope by the stalagmite, the careful step over the crack shaped like a smile, waiting to guide anyone with a good reason and a better attitude. Mistag met with elders and kept his peace the way a blacksmith keeps his tools, always within reach, never misused. The city's strength was not loudness but rhythm, and rhythm is very hard to argue with. Zanek's second day on the surface took her beneath the open market awnings where apples glowed like shy lanterns. She traded a small trinket, no more than a loop of wire, twisted the caveway, for a ribbon a child insisted she must have. "For your mark," the child said, and tied it so gently that even Sigmund, watching sourly from a distance, felt something near his ribs unclench, and then, annoyed at himself, clench again. Zanek pressed the ribbon, astonished that a stranger would hand her colour as if it were nothing at all. At dusk, the Duke asked her opinion of the river. "It talks," she said, serious as a magistrate. "It tells secrets it wants everyone to know." The Duke smiled into his wine. "Yes," he said, "ours does." When night settled, Zanek climbed the tower to look farther. Lumbridge spread around her like a storybook the wind had opened. Torches along the bridge winked in pairs. Far off, a sheep coughed like a disapproving uncle, and then contentedly remembered grass. Even the nervous rooms where HAM plotted seemed from this distance merely rooms. Chairs, a lectern, a table that could have served better purposes. Zanek's mark thinned and brightened with the moon's attention. "Balance," she whispered to no one in particular. "We could balance, you and I. It is an old truth, ask any bard or, failing that, a miller, that when two worlds begin to learn one another, mischief stirs. Sometimes it is friendly, like a cat deciding your lap belongs to it. Sometimes it is not." Beneath the kindness of the days that followed, something began to coil, a plan built from fear, a tapestry stitched from words like pure and threat that never quite mean what their speakers think. But that is for later. For now, let your breathing slow with the river. Hear the cellar's small sounds settling into memory. Imagine the lantern light, standing its ground against the treacheries of draught and damp. Imagine the Duke at his desk, weighing a dozen letters and listening for the one that tells the truth. Imagine Zanek at the window with the ribbon in her hands, wondering whether to tie it to her mark or to a railing, so it can talk to the wind. Imagine Khazgar on the path counting steps, 1, 2, 3, so that those who follow him will not stumble. If you're growing drowsy, and good you should, know that the path is gentle for the moment. The Dorgashun are at work. Lumbridge is at supper. There will be knots to untie, yes. There will be doors that don't quite latch. But part of heroism is resting when the world allows it, and letting peace, small, practical peace, do some of the work. So close your eyes if you like, and keep your lantern trimmed in your thoughts. When you open them again, we'll step farther, up into morning bread steam and down into humming caverns, and follow the thread that runs from a brooch in the dirt to the kind of bravery that doesn't need a shout. Part 2. Lanterns, plots, and the tears that remember. Settle back, little wanderer. Let the pillow cradle your thoughts the way the River Lum cradles moonlight. Our lantern still burns, and in its halo we'll follow Zanik, small in stature, enormous in wonder, as two worlds draw close enough to hear each other breathe. For several soft mornings, Lumbridge received her like a shy sunrise. She learned the routine of the castle bell and the bakery's pleasant tyranny. Bread waits for no one. She met the Lumbridge sage, whose words travel slowly because they prefer to admire the scenery, and Father Erek, who lets the church's stained glass do half his speaking for him. Hans bowed with that timeless politeness of his, and even the village children, fearless as sparrows, practiced saying Dorgashun with their tongues tucked carefully behind their teeth. Zanik adored everything. She loved especially that humans teach their light to wear colour. She loved that their shops smell like brave little decisions, buy the nails, fix the hinge. She loved the river's gossip and the market's hum, and she loved the way the sky seems to go on making itself even when no one is watching. The ribbon the child tied for her, remember? She wore not on her brow but at her collar, where it could whisper to her heart. Yet in a room with no windows, where air goes stale from being told the same story too many times, the HAM faithful were arranging their fears like furniture. They fretted that kindness is a siege engine, and welcome mats are ladders. Their leader, Johannes Ulsbrecht, kept notes in neat script and opinions in untidy heaps. He spoke of purity in a voice that sounded braver indoors than out. And somewhere in those circles of worry stood a slimmer shadow, a man quick with reasons to be afraid, Sigmund, whose thoughts pointed always toward a lock, a bolt, a bar. Mistag, measured as a mason's string, heard rumblings of plots and sent word. The Dorgashun would test the trouble for themselves. Zanik and a trusted surface friend would go among the HAM as quiet observers. No armour's clank, only the hush of wool robes and the patience of people who are tired of being misunderstood. So it was that one evening, under a sky so blue it had to be new paint, Zanik and her guide lifted the trapdoor hidden under trampled grass and climbed down into speech that had forgotten how to listen. The hideout was a mouth packed with teeth, guards everywhere, sermons gnawing at the air. In such places, heroism has to tread softly. Zanik's courage is not only the kind that brandishes, it is the kind that waits, watches, and knows when to whisper, "Now!" And she did, again and again at the corners of that underground warren. A guard turned, a lookout blinked, and Zanik's little crossbow spoke in sharp, polite syllables. Not to kill, no. Only to sidestep harm long enough to reach the door at the centre of the hush. Behind it, important voices tangled over a plan. She listened, brow tilted so the faint mark upon it caught the lamplight like a thought remembering itself. But even careful feet can wake a jealous floorboard. Discovered, they were seized, iron-kissed wrist. Zanik was dragged away, the kind of a way that makes a story hold its breath. When the cell door groaned open again, it wasn't for her. She did not return with the guards. The corridor felt colder for it. And then, like a page turned by a wind that means well, there she was near the entrance above, small body cradled in the rough cradle of the earth. She was still as the space between heartbeats. Only the mark on her brow, faint as milk glass, held a quiet flame. Sometimes a soul stands at the seam between going and staying, and sometimes there is a place that remembers how to stitch. In Gielenor, that place is the cavern of the tears of Guthics, where Juna keeps watch and stories rise from the river like memories becoming water again. So, gently as you'd carry music, they brought Zanuck through the familiar caves. The path curved past stalagmites that keep secrets the way old men keep coins, and the dark grew friendly the way a room does once you find the chair by touch. At the cavern's mouth, Juna met them with the patience of someone who has counted every season twice. "Collect the tears," she murmured, not as a demand but as a remembering. And so the blue streams were gathered, drop by bright drop, until the bowl brimmed with a wisdom older than quarrel. The tears were poured over Zanuck's brow, and the mark, oh, the mark, shone as if dawn had stopped by for a private visit. Breath returned like a shy guest. Fingers twitched. The ribbon at her collar gave the smallest, happiest tremble. When she could speak, softly, for the cavern is a library of silences, Zanuck told what the locked room had revealed. HAM planned a machine, a metal worm with a cruel hunger. Fed by dwarf craft under the watermill's honest timbers, it would chew a tunnel into the swamp caves and call the river Lum down upon Dorgesh Khan, flood the lamps, drown the markets, break the little bridges that carry children's feet to school. The plan was a coward's thunder, meant to make an easy darkness where a difficult peace should be. Zanuck's jaw set the way steel decides to be steel. "We will not answer in kind," she said, voice low, "but we will answer." Back in Lumbridge, dawn put gold on the mill's sails as if to bless every loaf. But beneath the grainy smell of flour, something else turned, gears no honest farmer had ordered. Dwarves in HAM livery busied their hands in a place that deserved better tasks. A trapdoor hid more than grain bins. It hid a promise of harm, bolted together from fear, a blueprint of unneighbourliness. The lantern felt heavier in the hand for knowing it might soon be asked to shine on uglier truths. They made a plan just clever enough to look like luck. Zanuck hid where only a crate would fit. No hero is above an indignity if it hurries goodness along. And her companion wore the wool and brass of HAM as one wears a borrowed opinion, awkwardly but briefly. Below the mill, the air was full of a new kind of night, the clank and scratch dark of machines deciding to be wicked, and there, gloved and self-satisfied, stood Sigmund, with guards who mistake obedience for courage. He was not surprised to see trouble. Men who build it often expect it to knock. He had prayers against every blade, smug shields of piety meant to impress the gullible and the gods alike. But Zanuck's arrows fly where prayers do not reach, and friendship knows to change tactics when pomp insists on standing still. One by one the henchmen learned that loudness is not the same as strength, and Sigmund, cornered by a courage that would not crow about itself, fled like a dropped accusation, vowing the sort of vengeance that shrivels in daylight. The machine, ugly with purpose, still stood, chewing the air and dreaming of rivers. It takes a different kind of bravery to unmake something. Bolts were sheared, timbers relieved of duty. axles quieted like quarrels carefully laid to rest. When the final gear sighed and folded its teeth, the mill above seemed to breathe deeper, as if a weight had slipped off its shoulder and into the past. Word travelled, as it does even in rock, down through the tunnels and into Dorgesh Khan, where the lamps blinked as if surprised to still be allowed their niceness. Elders listened, Mistag measured. Children were told very gently that sometimes people on the surface are learning how to be neighbours, and that learning can make a mess before it makes a friend. Zanuck stood before the council with the patience of someone who has learned both kinds of silence, the frightened one that shrinks a heart, and the reverent one that humbles it. She asked for a chance, for bridges, for classrooms, for market stalls where coins from two worlds could test each other's shine. And the city, wise with long practice at not panicking, tilted toward yes. We will let the rest of that meeting float to the floor like paper dust motes. You look drowsy, and the tail knows how to tuck itself in when it must. For now, feel the castle stones cooling, hear the mills settling into honest work, smell lamp oil and fresh bread taking turns. Zanuck's ribbon has found its place again at her collar, fluttering with a small, relieved courage. The River Lum, told it will not be drafted into villainy, resumes its old duties, carrying stories, polishing pebbles, humming to ducks. Sleep now if you like. When next you open your eyes, we'll step into part 3. Down the welcomed road to Dorgesh Khan itself, lanterns like stars, classrooms that sing, a city that chooses to open its doors, and a final gentle word about how heroes keep their promises after the cheering stops. Part 3, Dorgesh Khan at Candlefall. Settle in one last time, traveller. Let the quilt remember your shape and the room grow kindly dim. We've walked through worry to the warm edge of understanding. Now we'll go below, properly below, where lanterns hang like tame constellations, and a city hums in the key of patience. We'll close the door softly behind us when we're done, and leave the lamplight to watch over your sleep. Morning in Lumbridge arrived with the smell of bread and a wind that had been rinsed in the river. Word had already run its quiet errands, HAM's machine dismantled, the worst of the fear pulled like splinters from a paw. The Duke, who has a talent for choosing the gentlest true thing, suggested a visit, not a delegation with horns and banners, just friends with good shoes and better manners. He wrote a note in a tidy hand and left room at the bottom for the future to sign its name. Down the cellar steps they went, the Duke's man with the lantern, a miller who brought loaves still murmuring heat, a mother with mended sleeves and a knack for making strangers feel already included. And you may imagine yourself among them if you like, because stories are generous and there's always one more place at the edge of the light. Zanuck led the way, ribbon at her collar, mark on her brow pale as a moth's wing. She smiled the smile of someone taking you home to meet the family she adores, and is certain you will too. Khazgar awaited them, as he does, with that reliable posture of his, and a nod that feels like finding the next stepping stone in a dark stream. "Stay close," he said, and the lantern bobbed a halo along the rock, white on grey, warm on cool, until the air took on the friendly hush of rooms that have learned your name. The tunnel curled, then opened, and there it was, Dorgesh Khan. Imagine bridges that arc like careful thoughts from ledge to ledge. Imagine glassy globes, each with its own small weather of light. Imagine workshops that sing, file on metal, wheel on axle, and markets that murmur with barter the way trees murmur with wind. Children ran in disciplined mischief along walkways that knew to guard them. Elders sat with the day across their knees, mending both nets and notions. The city felt held, not hidden, built by hands that prefer fixing to fearing. Mistag met them at a landing, where 3 bridges braided into one. He carried responsibility as a craftsman carries a favoured tool. It fit him, and he knew what it could do. "Welcome," he said, and the word made a little room around itself, and everyone stepped inside. The Lumbridge folk offered their gifts, bread, and a small iron bell to hang where visitors might wait, and the Dorgashun traders answered with bundles of cleverness, lamp crystals shaped to savour oil, hinges that slept without squeaking, chalk that marked stone like a good memory marks a heart. Zanuck guided them through a day that moved at the city's pace, unhurried, productive, soft-spoken. In the lantern-maker's hall, a young goblin named Rekla pressed the bell of a glass globe against a felt pad, and taught the miller how to settle wicks without scolding the flame. A teacher in a schoolroom drew circles within circles and asked the children how many paths 2 brave neighbours might find to the same door. The children answered with hands and laughter. In a little restaurant that smelled of toasted grain and lamp oil, the Lumbridge mother showed a cook how to coax the crust on a loaf to sing, and in return learned a cave spice that tasted like the idea of warmth put politely on the tongue. They visited a workshop piled with tidy chaos, where an inventor named Oldak held up a small sphere and squinted through it in the universal language of people about to try something interesting. Perhaps one day, he mused, a person could go from cellar to market by holding one of these and thinking very specifically about not falling. Everyone agreed this would be useful, and also pleased to test it on a sack of potatoes first. The potatoes performed nobly in the trial, arriving 1 crate over, a little surprised but unbroken, and the room applauded the future. It is good manners to cheer for the future when it behaves. At noon they paused on a balcony that overlooked the great market. Below, a dozen small dramas went about their day, a tailor bargaining with a lamp polisher, a child trading a secret for a boiled sweet, 2 old friends measuring a silence together just to see if it still fit. The Duke's man stood with a hand on the rail, letting the city's rhythm adjust his breathing until it matched the common tempo. "It is peaceful," he said, as though admitting tenderness to the air. "It is," Mistag agreed, "on purpose. There is a festival, small but beloved, that the Dorgashun keep when a worry has been answered properly. They call it Candlefall, the moment lamps that have earned their keep are lifted down, polished and rehung, just a little higher than before. Not grand. No fireworks, no speeches that block the path to the food, but a simple thanksgiving for light that has done its work." The elders decided, as if the thought had occurred to them simultaneously while folding napkins, that today was such a day. So, as evening tried on her softest blue, the city prepared. Ladders sprouted from walkways like friendly trees. Children, solemn with the joy of responsibility, wiped each globe with a cloth that smelled faintly of lavender and caves. Merchants lowered their signs and brushed the day's dust from their counters. In the great market, a space cleared itself the way ponds clear for a moon, easily, as though remembering an old step. Zanuck took the first ladder. Heroes should sometimes do the small things first. She lifted a lamp, polished the burrs from its wire, and rehung it a hand's breadth higher. The children cheered as if a star had agreed to live closer to their bedtime stories. Then everyone took a lamp in turn, Lumbridge folk and cave folk, elders whose hands shook only from the earnestness of long life, little ones who watched their own carefulness with thrilled attention, and the city brightened by increments like an idea deciding to be real. Music began as it often does underground, a rhythm on the rails of a handcart, a tap-tap on a pipe, then a low whistle that wandered in as if it had been passing by and liked the weather. Someone with a bone flute lifted a tune that felt older than quarrels and newer than dessert, and a drum followed at a respectful distance. No one danced as if to conquer the space. They swayed as if to thank it. The Duke spoke briefly, the way good speakers do when a place is already saying what needs to be said. He praised hinges and bread and the miracle of neighbours with different sunsets, finding the same lamplight. Mistag answered in the city's fashion. He named all the people who had carried something that day, a wick, a loaf, a frightened thought, so that gratitude would not get lost on the way to where it was needed. When he finished, he bowed to Zanuck with the pride of an uncle who remembers when she could not reach the lower rung of a ladder and now trusts her with the top. Up on a high catwalk, the Lumbridge bell found its hook. A child pulled the rope and the note travelled very agreeably through the market and into the tunnels, a round, welcoming sound, the sort that says both "here we are" and "take your time." Below, a stall opened with a sign sketched in 2 alphabets. It sold nothing but patience by the cup and was very successful. Of the ones who had tried to flood the caves, there was little to say. Fear is a poor architect. Its buildings lean and their doors stick. In the weeks that followed, fewer ears in Lumbridge found comfort in HAM's whispering. The group's slogans looked smaller in the daylight and smaller still beside the practical beauty of trade, hinges that never squeaked and loaves that never sulked. Sigmund learned, as people do when their echoes vanish, that bluster feeds no lamps. Let him drift out of our tale now like smoke that chose the wrong direction. The night deepened in a very satisfactory way. Candleful's lamps held a polished glow that did not jostle the dark so much as befriend it. Down in the mine, the steady metronome of picks continued. Tap, tap, tap. A heartbeat the city has trusted for generations. The River Lum, even from here, could be heard speaking in its sleep, rehearsing the secrets it tells on purpose. Bread cooled in half circles on racks, and learned, at last, to be quiet. Zanuck, ribbon fluttering in a breeze, careful not to tangle it, stood with her elbows on a railing and watched the market breathe. Balance, she said again, not as a lesson now, but as a contented observation, like remarking to a friend that the chair finally does not wobble. The Lumbridge mother pressed a small bundle into her hands, a cloth embroidered with a sunrise. For whatever window you like, she said, so the morning feels expected. Zanuck unfolded it, smiling the way a person smiles when a new tradition tips its hat. She thought of the cellar ladder, of visitors pausing under the bell, listening for the echo, then stepping into a circle of light they had helped to lift higher. She thought of Juna's cavern, of the tears that remember, and of how memory can be a lamp when it behaves itself. She thought of the child who had tied a ribbon without permission, because kindness rarely waits for paperwork, and because stories love a simple promise made simply. The Duke and Mistag set a small stone on the landing where 3 bridges meet. Not a monument, not a decree, just a smooth river stone with 2 thumbprints pressed into it before the clay had hardened, 1 human and 1 goblin. Travellers running late or early would touch it as they passed, and the oil from their fingers would grant it a shine as the years learned to stack neatly. It grew very late, in the best possible sense. The great market settled into the polite hush of tired goodness. Walkways cooled, the last ladder was folded, and the last child reminded his legs that beds exist. Zanuck carried the sunrise cloth to a small window near the school, tied it so the breeze could practice optimism, and stood back to see whether it improved the view. It did. Sunrises usually oblige. When it was time to go, and bedtime always arrives on time, even in a city that keeps excellent hours, Khazgar led the friends back along the path that remembers feet. At the cellar ladder, the Lumbridge bell gave a soft note for free, as bells sometimes do when they are pleased. The Duke's man doused the lantern with the care you give a faithful thing when you ask it to rest. They parted with those unshowy goodbyes that mean more for being small. "Tomorrow," someone said, as if the word were an arrangement. "Tomorrow," answered someone else as if it were. Now the room you're in is quiet in the same way Dorgesh Khan grows quiet when it means it. The air has learned your breathing and keeps time with it. If you listen, you can almost hear the mines tapping far below your pillow. Tap, 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 confirming that work worth doing does not mind the dark. If you half close your eyes, the polished lamps of Candlefall arrange themselves on the inside of your lids as a map of friendly stars. Somewhere the River Lum rehearses a compliment for the morning, and a baker turns in her sleep, dreaming of a crust that sings. Let your shoulders soften. The chair is no longer a chair. It is a patient cloud. The bed is a raft on the Underlum, a gentle current taking you past bridges and market stalls, past Oldak's sensible potatoes, and the bell that says, "Take your time," past the sunrise cloth waiting at the small school window, and past Zanuck, who looks up as you drift by and gives the small, encouraging nod of a friend who knows you will arrive where you need to. This is how our tale ends, which is to say it continues without fuss. In Lumbridge, a castle stone cools. In Dorgesh Khan, a lamp remembers to shine a hand's breadth higher. Between them, a ladder keeps its rungs on their best behaviour, and a round river stone collects thumbprints until it looks like it belongs to everyone. Fear, poor, busy Fear, goes to bed hungry. Peace eats well, then washes the plates. Close your eyes. Keep a lantern lit somewhere easy to reach, on a shelf in the mind perhaps, and leave the cellar door not open, not shut, but kindly ajar. If you dream of bridges, walk them. If you dream of markets, barter gently. If you dream of a ribbon, tie it wherever the breeze can find it. Morning will come like a familiar, well-timed bell. For now, sleep. And let the world of Gielenor tuck you in with its little lights, its honest work, and its promise that the next step remembers you